today's session, we're going to have about gaming conceptualization and visualization. So our speakers for today would be Mohammed Babli, right there. And then we have Borat Fifer. So I'll introduce Mohammed Babli, first of all. In one line, that's an Arab with a Japanese soul. Currently, he's a technology consultant by day and a game developer by night. His passion is to establish a gaming ecosystem. The potential in the region for gaming gives the impetus to development of games. That's about Mohammed Babli. And then we have Borat Fifer, who is the founder of Plush Apocalypse Production. Borat Fifer is an independent game designer and a programmer with over 14 years of experience making games. Most recently, he collaborated with 17-Bit as a lead engineer and a designer on the Crossplatform, award-winning strategy game Skulls of the Shogun, available for Xbox Live Arcade, Windows phones, Windows 8, Steam, and iOS. It reinvents turn-based strategy gameplay with the speed and accessibility of an arcade game. He has worked at companies like Radical Entertainment, Sony Online Entertainment, and Electronic Arts. At EA, he was lead AI programmer on a game in development with Steven Spielberg. His other published credits include Scarface, The World Is Yours, which is available on PlayStation 2, Xbox, and PC, and Untold Legends, Dark Kingdom, a launch title for the PlayStation 3. He has written a wide variety of game development articles on programming, design, and business in books like Game Programming Gems series, Secrets of Game Business, and industry websites like Gamasutra. He has also taught technical game design at the Vancouver Film School. That's about Borat Fifer. Borat Fifer, please.
Thanks. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the production cycle of Skulls of the Shogun and our development process and the challenges we've gone through and sort of the lessons we've learned. There we go. I don't know, is this going to work? Can I get the next slide? Thanks. All right, yeah, so like I was saying, I've worked in the game industry for a long time, but in traditional sort of console game development, and I met my two business partners on Skulls of the Shogun there at Electronic Arts working on the Spielberg project. And so my business partner, Jake, we left at different points because of canceled projects, that kind of thing, and my business partner, Jake, came to me with the idea for Skulls, and so we decided to form like a small studio. It's actually just sort of a collaboration. And so we kind of each have our own companies, but we came together to make this game. Slides, all right. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit just about the game in general, so you have an idea what it's about. And then I'm going to talk about the game production cycle used at companies like EA, stuff we learned there that we applied as small independent developers. And then I'll go through some of the challenges we ran into doing that and the stuff we've learned. And hopefully, even if you're not a game developer, you work on software or dealing with cross-platform application development in any sense, you'll be able to take away some kind of useful lessons learned. So if you'd switch to the video. So we like to call Skulls of the Shogun an arcade strategy game. You play little squads of skeleton samurai fighting it out in the samurai afterlife. It's very much inspired by games like Advance Wars or Final Fantasy Tactics, but we wanted to, a lot of those games, as much as we enjoy them, were kind of very slow and sort of plodding, and going through a lot of menus, and we wanted to make it feel a lot more like an action game to kind of reach a new audience, people who weren't necessarily into that kind of genre before. So it's a bit like chess, where you have, your general is kind of like the king and queen. He's the most powerful unit, and the goal is to kill the enemy general using all your troops. And as you kill your enemies, they die and they drop their skulls, and that's how, by eating the skulls of your fallen enemies, that's how you power up your units. And so you're deciding like who to power up and how to defeat your enemy's general. Okay, so Just a little background on the game and the development process. It's actually started out as an iPhone game concept, but we looked at our background as console developers, and we wanted to bring it there too, because that kind of gameplay was not really on console very often. So we took the turn-based kind of gameplay that was very at home on phones and tablets, and kind of tried to speed up the gameplay and added high fidelity artwork that would work well on the couch and a big screen. So along the way, we signed a publishing deal with Microsoft. So we launched on Xbox 360, Windows Phone, and Windows 8. And then after a short sort of exclusivity period, we launched on Steam, which is one of the biggest PC distribution platforms for games on Windows like 7 and earlier, and then iPhone and iPad. So the whole development cycle took probably about 4 years. That includes just under a year of part-time development, working on other contracts and other stuff, and then maybe like 7 or 8 months of post-launch support. So after we initially launched, taking it to Steam and iPhone. And there were 3 of us full-time for the bulk of the project, and then a handful of people towards the end for support work like sound effects, music, additional animation support, QA, and PR and marketing. And we were actually located in 2 cities and 3 locations, so a lot of our development, we used tools like Skype and Google Docs and all that kind of stuff. So just kind of a breakdown of some of the stuff we learned working at big console companies. The game production cycle didn't used to be this way. It kind of formulated slightly different than other software development, where it's broken up into 4 phases. The concept phase is really about brainstorming, but also prototyping. You're building gameplay in as quick and cheap a possible manner, and testing out ideas, and you throw away your prototypes very rapidly. The goal is to fail quickly. And the end result of this process is that you have a really crisp idea of what the game is about, a mission statement, that kind of defines what the game is, that allows you to decide whether or not you should add a feature. Does the feature, go with that mission, or doesn't it? Then you shouldn't add it. And then after that, we have pre-production, which is taking that framework and building what's called a vertical slice. So that's like a level of the game, 5 to 10, 15 minutes of gameplay that has as high fidelity, like has everything finished in the game as much as possible, but just that for that one level for those few minutes. Because a lot of times, it used to be in game productions, they would make all the levels in the game, and then they would find one thing in the gameplay that wasn't fun, and then that would require changing all the other levels. So this production structure is focused on, figuring out the rules of the game, the mechanics, the interactions, and then after that you build all the content so you don't redo a lot of your work. And then from there, you go on to production, and that's filling out the rest of that structure. And then post-production, you're doing like QA and optimizations and stuff like that. So for us, the first 2 phases took about the first year, some of which was, like I said, part-time. So you see here, these are shots of the one level we were building over time. And in the bottom right, you see that's the end result, the final level, with all the effects and the artwork and layers of animation and stuff. And we were basically trying to figure out, we started with the level we thought would be small, to figure out, how small could we make a level, how quick could we make this gameplay, and realized it was actually a medium-sized level. It took a bit too long. So then we built a second level to see how big it should be. So we had 2 sort of data points of like what's a medium or small level and what's a big level, and then built all the tools we needed to do to support that process, animation tools, level design tools, and then so somewhere along in production we got a little bit of angel investment funding that let us do more full-time production. And then towards the end, or maybe 2/3 the way into production, we signed our deal with Microsoft, as I said. So in this phase, we were writing the story script for the single-player game. We were designing and building the rest of the levels, both single-player and multiplayer levels. We were adding functionality. Like up until now, you could only play the game with another human being. Like, so we added artificial intelligence that would play against you. We added networking. And we refined our tutorial. So this is a shot from our one of, I think, the second pass on our tutorial. It's still like rough presentation, but we're playtesting it in front of people to understand what they were confused by, what they were getting, that kind of thing, and balancing the pacing and difficulty of the overall game. So then in post-production, you know, after we started working with Microsoft, we were trying to ship the game simultaneously on all 3 platforms, which is very challenging for 2 programmers. So we did a lot of porting to Windows 8, a lot of optimizations for the new ARM processor-based tablets, and added asynchronous play. Because it's turn-based, you can, you know, send turns basically back and forth, and Microsoft had a new API that allowed you to do that between the console and the phone and the tablets and the PCs. So we supported that. One of the first titles support that, actually. And then for Steam and iPhone, iPad, we added some new levels, and we refactored the networking backend to kind of move away from Microsoft's technology to a third-party technology that allowed us to do cross-platform with all the other platforms. So now I'm going to talk about some of the challenges we ran into technologically, just the challenges of developing on all those platforms, design-wise, excuse me, how we tried to, you know, sort of solve that problem of creating a really accessible strategy game, since most strategy games are very kind of hardcore and obtuse. And then just some of the business challenges of trying to reach, you know, both a casual and a hardcore audience, and navigating all these like changing platform markets. So the game's built on C#, and it uses XNA, which is Microsoft's now sadly defunct game engine. It's a very lightweight game engine. It just kind of doesn't, you know, get in your way too much, but it just provides a bunch of libraries for you to use. So using C# especially was very, very productive for us. It was allowed us to reuse, you know, perhaps like 95 to 99% of the game code across all the platforms, and there's just minor changes of like user interface and little tweaks here and there, but for the most part, very high amount of reuse. And it also gave us like fast tool development, so we were able to quickly stand up, you know, our animation tool in a matter of like, you know, a couple weeks, and then get, you know, a bunch of animation into the game very quickly. The downsides were that we had to then, once Microsoft discontinued XNA, we had to port it to an open source version called Monogame, and that allowed us to get to Windows 8 and iPhone and iPad. Then the last downside of C# is just it's a memory managed programming language, which means, you know, it will periodically clean up memory for you, and you can't really control that as well. So for any sort of game development, you need to very much control and manage your memory on yourself, and kind of try to avoid any sort of hiccups or hitches in the processing. So one of the things we learned working with all these different platforms is that we still, even though we had great tools like C# to share a lot of code between them, we still needed a bunch of time per platform to, you know, optimize both the performance and like frame rate, but also the experience. So stuff like the phone would have slightly different, you know, interface for moving units than the tablet. So the tablet, you could swipe your hand around and like draw a nice path, and on the phone you would just kind of, you know, move a little smaller motions to move units around. And then, you know, optimizations, there were it was hard to even like tell, like some stuff, optimizations on the phone would actually, you know, not work on the tablet. It would, you know, they would actually be more expensive. So it was very inconsistent and hard to form, like, you know, because of the disparity in different types of hardware, just what would be an optimization here versus there. So we tried to build the game to be very modular with those optimizations, basically make it you know, able to turn on and off, you know, any of those optimizations as we could. So when we got a new device and we realized, you know, okay, the iPod, you know, 4, it's like super limited memory, so we have to turn this off and that off instead. And also we did stuff like streamline the interface. Originally we had, you know, the mouse interface was very sort of conventional. A lot of other PC games do a lot of double clicking. And there was a lot of code to kind of handle these two different code paths for touch versus, you know, single touch versus double click. And then we just realized, why are we doing this? Like, let's just make it as simple as possible and streamline that interface so that, you know, a single touch does the same thing as a single click. So design-wise, you know, our goal of trying to introduce this strategy gameplay to more casual players, you know, is a larger potential audience. So that's obviously good. Hopefully more people will buy your game. And we knew we wanted to, you know, streamline the interface, speed up the game, but we didn't want to sacrifice any of the depth. We didn't think casual players necessarily liked stupider games. They just liked, be more respectful of their time, let them get into the game straight away. And we had this sort of, approachable style. For my partner, Jake, he was the artist, and he, worked in Japan for quite some time at Sega, and so he had these sort of like a lot of Eastern, like Japanese art style influences, as well as more Western, like, street art kind of influences. Wanted to sort of combine those into something that was kind of fresh and accessible. And I think that part, worked out fairly well, except, well, I'll get to that in a bit, but so we had that mission statement from the first phase of the game's production of making an arcade strategy game. So like an arcade game, like a fighting game, it's very fast-paced, it's very competitive, but a strategy game, is more thoughtful and kind of, usually plotting, and you wanted to combine that like thoughtfulness with this sort of pace of a more action-y kind of game. So that gave us a real easy razor of when we decided, came up with a new idea for a feature. As you do throughout the whole development process, everyone's always coming up with ideas. Some of them are good, some of them you can't add because they're too time consuming, and some of them ultimately don't meet that mission statement. So if the feature made the game slower, we wouldn't add it. And it's very easy, 5-second conversation. Instead of, in a lot of game productions, you can thrash around and should we add this, shouldn't we add this? And it was like, does it make the game slower? Okay, it's not going in, period, done, all right. So I think in terms of the design, we achieved the accessibility. We, got rid of the grid that a lot of these games have and made it such that you can just move a unit directly by, controlling the unit instead of like trying to pick the square they move to and, what's the perfect square. It's more about, how your units are moving and are they flanking someone and that kind of stuff. And it required, we didn't realize this until we got into it, but because of the grid's kind of useful in the sense that it conveys the user a lot of information. It's like, what unit can you attack? It's the unit that's 2 squares ahead of you. So having removed that, we had to rethink a lot of that visual design, so we had a lot of stuff in there, like units, when they were in counterattack range would raise their swords and play a little sound, and a lot of information right in front of the player, like the unit's health was the flag on their back, and so everything was like presented as in as streamlined as possible. And so, yeah, like I said, I think we did a decent job of making that actually work because we did a ton of play testing. We just basically went to, we started with developer friends and other designers, and then took it to, more non-developers, other gamers, and then took it to public-facing shows. So in the US, there's a bunch of consumer shows that are basically just gamers can come in and test out new games that are to be released. And we went to a couple in the UK as well. And we even attempted like metrics and try to figure out, okay, how can we judge, write some code to track some things, and how can we judge if the player is confused or not getting something. And we actually, the code to do that, to do the tracking was like trivial, but the code to do the analysis was not. And we were just like, okay, but we can figure out if someone's confused at this point in the game by putting it in front of them and watching them for 30 seconds, or we can spend weeks, trying to analyze this data. So we really just focused on like in-person playtesting, and that helped us go through our we did many revisions to the tutorial based on, getting people to really understand it. Excuse me. So when we launched, we were pretty well reviewed. Generally speaking, we got a bunch of awards, nominations. The stores that allowed users to rate the game are pretty highly rated, like 4.5 out of 5 across the board. But it's interesting. So looking at our Metacritic, which is where those images come from, Metacritic is a site that aggregates review scores. And so on iPhone and iPad, we're 93, which is actually really, really good, 93 out of 100. We're like the 13th best rated game, which is like, that's crazy. It's awesome. But on Xbox, we're like 81, so that's not too bad. It's pretty good. And on a PC, we're 72, which is interesting because it's the same game pretty much across all those platforms. So it really told us something that, different platforms, really, they're different audiences. They want different things. The PC audience wanted a harder core sort of game, and it was going to be harder to get the word out there about this kind of gameplay. I'll do it twice. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So in this process, we kind of realized while we're trying to reach multiple audiences, we didn't necessarily, while the game, I can't really talk about like sales figures, it made its money back and is kind of profitable and helping fund additional development. But, while we're the 13th best like rated iPhone, iPad game, we're not the 13th best selling iPhone, iPad game by far. So, what went wrong there? And I think we definitely, the casual players were still put off by the fact that it was a strategy game. They still saw it as like, oh, that's a strategy game, that's not for me. And the hardcore players, were perhaps a little off-put by the style seeming too casual, like it looked too simple, even though the depth was definitely there. And so the lesson we took away from that really is that marketing isn't just about like telling people about your game, but signaling to those different audiences like why it's a kind of game they care about. So like how do they perceive the art and the videos and the marketing? Why do they think it is one of the types of games they like? And to not be afraid of targeting different audiences with different marketing. It's still hard to do on like a single platform, on Steam or iPhone. You see the store, and you've got X number of screenshots, and you've got this block of text. So that can be still difficult to manage, but through other channels, you can target them in terms of what kind of information they're looking for about the game. And then lastly, business-wise, just the platform sort of landscape was changing underneath us so quickly. When we started, the Xbox 360 was sort of really the home for a lot of successful independent games. And in the couple years that we were working on the Xbox version, that went down by like a factor of 10 in terms of the average independent developers' sales. Thank you. So on the flip side, though, Windows Phone, we were really surprised about. At that point, it was like 2 years old, the phone itself. But it was definitely underserved. There weren't many games, there wasn't a lot of competition. So it actually ended up being one of our more popular platforms. Actually, I'll go back a slide. Wait for it. No, all right. So it had, along with Steam, the older sort of PC platform, and Windows Phone, that ended up being our most popular platforms. No, we're back to, yeah, so that's at the bottom there, that pie chart is kind of a breakdown roughly of the percentages of which platform did what. So with Windows 8, it was a brand new store, so we were hoping, new adopters, they wouldn't have many games to choose from, and but it didn't end up selling quite as well as we hoped. And with Steam, it was starting to get fairly crowded. But not yet now. Today, it's like super crowded a year or so later. An iPhone, when we launched, comparatively, we looked at games that were similarly reviewed, strategy games, critically acclaimed, and got featured by Apple as we did, and there was still like a drop-off of about 40% from like that year. So it's super important to understand where in the life cycle the platform is. Is it early days where there's not many users? Is it that sort of like peak period where there's a lot of users and not a lot of competition, like with Windows Phone? Or is it like crowded and old, like the iPhone, iPad store, iTunes today? And it's not that a game can't be successful in a crowded market, but you have to do more. You have to spend money on advertising. You have to, figure out different ways to kind of rise above the level of noise. So our idea doing a cross-platform development was always to kind of mitigate some of this risk between the different platforms. And to some extent, we did an okay job, not as well as we hoped. Like Windows 8 didn't take off as much as we would have liked, and Xbox 360 was doing more worse than we expected. But at the same time, stuff like Windows Phone and Steam helped, was perhaps a bit better than we would have thought. So we also kind of learned, to manage our sales like post-launch. Like back in the day of releasing a game on CD or DVD, you would, put it out there and you did all your marketing at launch, and that was all you did. That's all you could do. And so we had a lot of just sort of trials and tribulations of trying to price the game. We tried to, because it was a premium game, like from start to finish, we priced it at what the average like premium small game was on those platforms, like 10, 15 to 7 at launch. And then Microsoft, because they wanted to try and boost the sales, they wanted to lower the price, so we did that. But there was no promotion at that point, so it really didn't affect sales. So it just basically made us less money. And then with Steam, Steam lets you control a lot of that yourself, and they do promotions. So if you decide to do like a 50% off sale, they will put you on the front page and like heavily promote you. So using those tools together, you can get like crazy amount of results that really impact your sort of gross revenues well before, or well better than, you know, even launch. So if you look at those spikes on that graph, those are the 2 times we did sales on Steam, and the revenue, like for the first one, beats, you know, all the revenue like to date, even though the game is 50% off. And that's the combination of like sales and promotion. And so an iPhone, iPad, it's a little bit in between. Apple doesn't necessarily automatically feature you when you do a sale, but if you tie it with other promotions and other channels to help promote the game, then you can kind of do okay, better than, not as good as Steam, but you know, closer. There we go. So just to wrap up a little bit, some of the lessons we learned, you know, to spend in game development, it's super crucial to spend enough time early on to clarify your design, come up with that sort of mission statement, spend time prototyping and building your vertical slice so you don't throw away work afterwards, and picking the right tools. You know, for us it was C# and XNA, and you know, focusing on productivity and like what is the right tool for the job, and not necessarily just like, oh, this is, you know, the popular tool today. And just, you know, really like play testing and iterating like nonstop throughout the whole, you know, process. And then business-wise, just like trying to push those marketplace decisions closer to, you know, when the product's actually done. And we didn't have that luxury. It's probably easier to do today as well, but the closer you are to when the product is being launched, that you make that decision, the more you know what the marketplace is actually like. And then when you're trying to target multiple audiences, to, you know, not be afraid of marketing to them differently and signaling to them, you know, individually, like why is this a game that you care about, and you might care about different types of games. But really, like, first and foremost, even if like it's useful to do cross-platform development, go first where the audience is. And we're trying to bring this gameplay to consoles that was more popular on mobile, but at the same time, mobile is where those players were, so we should have just focused on that first. And then post-launch, just really use every single tool you have, because it's almost just as important a time as when you're launching to kind of, you know, make sure the game's like still bringing in revenue and still, you know, allowing you to keep developing other stuff. So there's some contact info, and yeah, it's out now in the stores if you want to check it out. I've also got some other links to more design and kind of production aspects, like building the AI and stuff like that. So yeah, if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Bharat. Do we have any questions from the audience? Anyone? Can we get a mic? Yes.
About playtesting, what if we don't have a lot of players to test with?
Yeah, I mean, there's always people. That's the thing. It is, if there's not necessarily like places to go that you know of or stuff like that, I think it's a matter of being resourceful and like finding, you know, groups that are meeting up. Maybe they're into technology, or maybe there's like a local like programming group, or maybe it's just friends, just forcing your friends to sit down. It's like, look, you're my friend. You're gonna sit down and play this, and I'm gonna watch you, and it's gonna be weird. And I mean, there's definitely an art to it in terms of like, you know, let them just watch them. Don't you know, interrupt them. Don't like, you know, just listen basically, and you know, do that for as long as you possibly can. It's excruciating, because there will always be, since it's in development, there will always be stuff that's wrong, and you'll want to be like, no, but wait, just don't do this. But just like sit through it. And I think even having one person do that can tell you a lot. And usually most of these things you'll know are wrong with the game, but what it tells you is that how important each thing is. Something you might not think is important is actually totally stopping them from enjoying the game. And so I think it's a matter of like, if you're really good at like just learning how to listen to that process, then you can just do it with a few amount of people. I mean, it definitely helps if you can go to any sort of show where you can show off the game. I mean, you know, stuff like PAX in the US, we got like 100 people, and it's super useful. At the same time, like after 10, you're just like watching the person do, like struggling with the same thing, and you're just like, I hate myself. but yeah, so definitely just try to be resourceful and find anyone who will play, period.
Thanks.
Any more questions? Can we get a mic there to the gentleman, please? All the way there? Okay, you have a question here? Yeah, sure. We'll come to you.
And students as well. I was going to add, like any, they're kind of, you know, apt. You know, they're there to like learn and they'll be interested.
Hello. My question is, it's always difficult to when you make a game. It's always difficult to count like between the hard and casual gamers of the game you're trying to make. My question is, was that a factor in like the game development process, and how involved was the factor, if it did?
Yeah, I mean, well, we just tried to get, our philosophy towards like casual players and that kind of thing was just that they weren't, I mean, because we were almost casual players kind of at some level. Like it's not, people can be casual in different ways, right? They can be casual in terms of like time or like type of gameplay. They don't want to be like super competitive. So there's various factors, and we didn't treat people like, oh, they want it dumbed down. It's like, no, they just want it like, you know, like they don't want to waste their time. So you know, get them, you know, let them get to the good stuff, you know, more quickly. So it was the thing for us was really just like honing that tutorial and kind of that introduction and the pacing to be as, you know, smooth as possible.
Thank you.
Next
Hi.
question.
From before, when you start the development phase, how do you choose, like, how do you make the decision on which platform or which console to go for, and why would you choose one and not the other? For example, I saw in the presentation, like, you went PC, iOS, Xbox, but the PlayStation was out, right? So how do you decide where to go, and doesn't that kind of create like maybe a fear of alienating some sort of players?
Oh, yeah.
Since today, you know, the fan loyalty is raging. So how do you make that decision?
That is a great question. Now we totally ran into that too. People just like, it wasn't even PlayStation players, because I think some of the like super fans like knew that we're in XNA, and they, you know. But when we signed the exclusivity with Microsoft, so that, you know, we were tied, our hands were tied in terms of talking about other platforms, and it may even still come out on PlayStation like 4 today. Who knows? That's still in the future. But like we at the time, because we were exclusive to Microsoft, we couldn't talk about it. And so just because we couldn't talk about it, people were like, "Oh no, it's never going to come out on, you know, PC," and we were just like, "Oh God, no." Not, you know, we kind of had to deal with, you know, that PR sort of trying to couch that terms while calming those people down. It was very challenging, but ultimately we approached it like, you know, from a very business sort of oriented position, in the sense that we looked at the platforms, we looked at, you know, sales figures for games, we looked at what, you know, we thought the game would take to make, which of course it was more than we thought it would take, but and we looked at, you know, what would we need to make our money back. And so on the Xbox 360, when we started, your average game, like, no, I think, let me recall here, it was like 70% of games sold at least like 30, 40,000 units. And for us, that would have been like great, like at the time, would more than made our money back. And so we're like, okay, we should be on Xbox. That's one of the reasons we, you know, sort of refocused on console, because even the mobile stores at the time were rough in terms of the average chance you would make your money back. So we focused on it that way, and we were building an XNA as well, because it was just helped speed up the process. So it was partly the tools that Microsoft had, and partly just the platform, you know, of the Xbox, the store. And then from there, it was like, well, what else can we do? How else can we kind of capitalize on that? And we wanted to, there were other games like Bastion, who'd done something similar, where they, you know, sold more and more on each additional platform they came out on. But that was still like a year or so before we launched. So we wanted to do the same thing, where it's like, you build word of mouth by coming out on additional platforms. And I think, you know, the platform marketplace had sort of changed from when Bastion launched, and now it's just even more crowded and even more difficult to sort of build that word of mouth over time. So that was definitely something we learned. And so even the platform you're starting out picking will probably not be the right one if the game production is long enough by the time it's done. So definitely try to put off that decision if possible.
Great, wonderful. Thanks. Do we have any more questions from the audience? That's it, I guess. So thank you so much, Bharat. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.